Hi everyone, welcome to this installment of René Unpacks. I'm René Santos, and in this episode, I'm going to unpack seated mountain pose. Right? Even if you don't do yoga, share yoga with me, you can incorporate this pose if you're in the office, right, or at home and you're watching television and you want to have uh, a pose you can start using to get engaged right away from the get-go. Right? So I really wanted to unpack this pose in particular for chair yoga because it's a fundamental pose, right? It's the pose that we start off with if you practice chair yoga. But oftentimes I think that we don't use it as effectively as possible, and we don't leverage, I think, what the potential of this pose could be if we do it. And I think in a way that I suggest that you try it out and see if you like it. So again, I have the chair on the side here just to show you how I think we can do better than I think sometimes we are not consciously aware of. So normally what I don't want people to do, and not because it's like awful, but just because I don't think it's as engaged and as leveraged as possible for this pose. So oftentimes what I see people do is they'll sit back all the way to the back of the chair, and they kind of slouch. The problem when we sit all the way back on our chair is that we fall back into the tendencies we do when we sit, right? And oftentimes we sit kind of like, right? So we just kind of slouch our body and our body's not engaged. And for me, a mountain pose is an engaged pose. It's actually a strong pose from the get-go, right? So I want to come back to that idea, that spirit of the pose, by incorporating things that will help us have a more active practice right from the get-go, even when we're sitting down. Okay. So again, normally I see people sit, and again, there's nothing wrong, but again, since we want a more active practice, even in chair yoga, we can do better, right? So I see people kind of slouch, and they kind of melt into the chair. So we don't want that. So again, if you're able to keep a nice long spine throughout your practice and sitting all the way back, great. But most people kind of struggle with that because, again, the tendency is for us to kind of just melt into the chair, right? So this turn this pose into a much more active pose, much more engaged pose. So to do that, again, if you take chair yoga classes with me, you kind of know what I do here. All I do is I encourage people to sit a little bit closer to the edge of the chair. Okay, again, I'm not to the point where you're gonna fall off, but enough where you have good amount of distance away from the back of your chair. Okay, now I'll turn around so you can see my feet placement, but normally what I again to get people to think about is the setup for seated mountain pose is basically have your feet hip distance apart, your knees in line with the hips, right? So everything kind of in line. You don't want your feet out a little bit too wide or too narrow, right? You want a balanced pose in mountain pose, right? Just like if we were doing standing, the same thing, balance. Okay, so again, feet in line with the hips, knees in line with the hips, so everything's nice there. Okay, now again, the tendency is for us kind of like to kind of slouch our lumbar spine. We kind of lean back. We kind of sit normally, okay? But again, we want an active practice. So again, to do that, all you have to do is press your feet down, press your sit bones down, hands on top of your lap, and just sit up nice and down, okay? Good. All right. So hopefully the sound of the yard work is not interrupting too much here, but hopefully you can hear me well. So again, the action here is feet hips distance apart, knees in line with your hips, right? So press your feet down, press your sit bones down, and then lengthen the spine nice and long, okay? So I like to lift my bottom rib cage up. I like to relax my shoulders, okay? So if you can, hopefully you can see that my spine is nice and long and it's not like rounding, right? You don't want to round the lumbar spine because you want to get an active pose. It's a very simple technique, but what that does is that from the get-go, from the very beginning of the class, your body's already engaged, it's already activated because you're encouraging your feet to press and then lift, right? And that right away, you're gonna feel it in your body. So if you do it with me, you'll feel it right away. So you set up, right? Feet in line with the knees and knees in line with the hips, right? I like to begin with placing my hands on top of my lap, right? I look forward, I relax my shoulders, and I press my feet and then press my sit bones and then lift my bottom rib cage up. Okay? Good. So I look straight ahead. And if you notice, my spine is nice and long, but my body is already feeling engaged. Okay, so those very simple, straightforward actions in the body, pressing, lifting, that really help turn this pose into a much more interesting pose, much more engaged pose, and also a much stronger pose that if you carry out throughout the whole practice, you're going to be able to turn, again, what's often seen as a very kind of a throwaway pose, like you're sitting, into something that's very active and very interesting for your body. Okay, so again, let me turn this way so I can show you my feet. So I'm going to turn my chair, and as I sit down, again, I'm sitting close to the edge of the chair, right? If you notice, my feet are in line with my knees are in line with my hips, okay? So I like to start off the pose again with my hands on my knees. I press my feet down, press the sit bones down, and kind of gently lift myself up. And you should be able to see my lengthening of my spine and my head also coming up a little bit, right? So I'm looking forward. My shoulders are relaxed, okay? But everything's engaged by pressing my feet down and lifting my rib cage up, okay? Then from there, of course, you can, start the poses and so on and so forth. Okay. So again, I hope you incorporate this into your practice. Play with it. See how it feels. I think if you start, playing with it, you start understanding some of the benefits that this pose gives. It's a very simple pose, simple actions, but I hope that you start to get some good takeaways from really turning what is again a very simple pose, but making it into a much stronger, much more engaged practice for yourself. Okay, so thank you very much, and I'll see you soon in the next videos.